Bring her to me, ordered the Mafia boss after seeing his black maid dance. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character. Naomi Carter was just another face in the crowd. A simple maid who worked tirelessly in the grand mansion of Dominic Romano, the notorious Mafia boss. She wasn't there to be noticed, nor did she seek attention. Her job was to clean, serve, and remain invisible, just another cog in the machine of luxury and power. But today, something was different. The evening had fallen, and the mansion was alive with the sound of distant conversations and clinking glasses. Naomi, feeling the weight of the long hours, found herself retreating to the quiet of the kitchen. She needed a moment to clear her head, to shake off the exhaustion that clung to her like a heavy cloak. In the solitude, she began to sway slightly, her body moving to the rhythm of a song playing softly on a nearby radio. She closed her eyes, lost in the music, in the fleeting joy of being alive, of being free for just a moment. What Naomi didn't know was that her small act of escape had caught the eye of someone who never overlooked anything, Dominic Romano. He was passing by the kitchen, a silent shadow in the sprawling mansion, when he noticed her. His gaze lingered, his sharp eyes cutting through the air as if he could see right into her soul. He had never paid attention to Naomi before. She was just another servant, another faceless employee. But tonight, something about her caught his attention. Perhaps it was the grace with which she moved, or the way the soft light reflected off her skin, but Dominic found himself watching, unable to tear his gaze away. Naomi, oblivious to the fact that she was being watched, continued to dance. It was nothing extravagant, just simple movements, but to Dominic, it was captivating. For a moment, he forgot about the power he held, the empire he had built. He was just a man, watching a woman who had no idea she was the focus of his attention. But as the song ended, Naomi snapped out of her trance, realizing she had allowed herself to become lost in a moment of weakness. She quickly stopped, her face flushing with embarrassment, but it was too late. Dominic had already made his decision. Bring her to me, he ordered, his voice cold and commanding, echoing in the empty hallway. Naomi's heart skipped a beat as the weight of his words settled in. What could he want with her? Was she in trouble? Her mind raced with possibilities, each one darker than the last. As the servants led her to the drawing room, Naomi couldn't help but wonder if she had made a mistake by letting her guard down. She entered the room to find Dominic sitting behind a massive mahogany desk, his piercing eyes studying her with an intensity she couldn't escape. He didn't speak immediately, and Naomi stood there, waiting, unsure of what to say or do. She had always been invisible to him, just another employee. But now, she felt the weight of his gaze, the power in the room that pressed down on her like a physical force. I saw you, he finally said, his voice low but steady. You danced. What? Naomi swallowed hard, unsure of how to answer. Her mind raced, but all she could muster was a simple, I needed a moment. Dominic nodded slowly, as if considering her words carefully. Then, to her surprise, he spoke again, softer this time. It was beautiful. Naomi blinked, confused. She hadn't expected that. A slight smile tugged at the corner of Dominic's lips, and he leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. You're more than just a maid, Naomi. His words hung in the air, and Naomi felt the weight of them settle into her chest. Was this a compliment? A threat? She couldn't tell. From now on, Dominic continued, I want you to work closely with me. You'll be in charge of certain tasks that no one else can handle. Naomi stood there, shocked. This was not what she had expected. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw something she hadn't noticed before, respect. A small, fleeting moment of it, but it was there. She didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time, Naomi felt like she was seen, not just as a maid, but as a person. And that realization shook her more than anything else in her life. Naomi's heart raced as she walked out of Dominic's study, her mind still trying to process the words he had spoken to her. You're more than just a maid, he had said. Naomi couldn't shake the feeling that this moment was going to change everything. She had always been invisible to him, just another face among many in his household. But now, she was something else, something more. She walked slowly back to her quarters, her thoughts swirling. What did it mean to be more than just a maid? What was Dominic thinking? She had no answers, but she couldn't ignore the strange flutter in her chest. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen. But as she stood in front of her small, modest room, she couldn't help but feel a sense of fear creeping in. She wasn't ready for whatever was coming next. The world she had known had been safe in its simplicity. It had been predictable. But now, things were changing, and change always brought uncertainty. As the days passed, Naomi's duties began to shift. No longer just a part of the background. She was asked to take on new responsibilities, tasks that had once been reserved for those closer to Dominic himself. She found herself working more closely with his personal staff, interacting with him in ways she had never imagined. And yet, despite her fear, she felt a strange pull to him. He had a presence that was impossible to ignore, and for reasons she couldn't understand, she found herself drawn to him, even as she reminded herself that he was the last person she should ever be involved with. Dominic, on the other hand, began to notice Naomi in ways he never had before. He watched her closely, observing the way she worked, the way she carried herself with quiet dignity. There was something about her that made him curious, something that went beyond her role as a maid. He had seen countless people serve him, but none had ever left an impression like Naomi did. One afternoon, as Naomi was working in the garden, Dominic approached her. She was bent over, planting flowers in the lush beds of the estate, completely unaware of his approach. He watched her for a moment before speaking. "Naomi," he called, his voice low and calm. She stood up quickly, startled, her hand instinctively brushing the dirt from her hands. She turned to face him, her heart beating faster than before. "Yes, sir?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "I've been watching you," he said quietly. Naomi's breath caught in her throat. "I didn't mean to be in your way," she stammered. Dominic shook his head slightly, a faint smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "No, it's not that. I've noticed something about you. Something I can't quite explain." Naomi felt a flush creeping up her neck, but she kept her gaze steady, not wanting to show how nervous she felt. "I don't know what you mean, sir," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You're different," Dominic said, his voice softer now. "I've never met anyone like you." Naomi didn't know how to respond. The words he spoke were flattering, but also unsettling. She had spent so long trying to remain invisible, and now Dominic was seeing her, truly seeing her. It was both thrilling and terrifying at the same time. "I'm just doing my job," Naomi said quietly, lowering her gaze to the ground. "That's what I thought," Dominic replied, his tone changing, becoming more serious. "But I think you're capable of more than just serving. I think you have the potential to be something more." Naomi looked up at him, her mind spinning. What did he mean? What was he trying to say? Before she could respond, Dominic turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, her heart pounding in her chest. She watched him go, a mixture of confusion and hope building inside her. She had no idea what was coming next, but for the first time in her life, she felt like she was standing on the edge of something new, something unknown. And that, more than anything, scared her. Days passed, and Naomi found herself caught in a whirlwind of new responsibilities. The mansion had always been an imposing place, but now it felt even larger, more daunting, with every corner and hallway seemingly watching her. She had grown accustomed to her quiet life, always moving. Behind the scenes, invisible to the people who lived in the world of luxury and power. But now, that world was starting to pull her in, and it was impossible to ignore the changes happening around her. Dominic had begun involving her more directly in the day-to-day operations of the estate. She found herself attending meetings she had never been a part of before, handling delicate tasks, and even liaising with other high-ranking members of Dominic's inner circle. The work was challenging, but Naomi found herself rising to the occasion, driven by a new sense of purpose. Despite the overwhelming nature of these changes, a part of her couldn't help but feel a certain thrill. She was no longer just a maid. She was part of something bigger. She had gained Dominic's trust, and with it came both fear and excitement. But amidst the chaos of her new life, one thing remained clear. the strange pull she felt toward Dominic. His presence was always there, a constant shadow looming over her. She couldn't deny that every interaction with him left her feeling more confused. Was it admiration? Respect? Or was it something deeper? Naomi didn't know. She tried not to think about it. But the more time she spent with him, the more difficult it became to ignore the subtle shifts in their dynamic. Dominic, on the other hand, had noticed the change in Naomi. He observed her more closely than before, not just for her efficiency, but for something else. There was something in the way she carried herself, something different from the others. She had a quiet strength, a humility that contrasted with the arrogance of the other staff, and a resilience that intrigued him. One evening, after a long day of overseeing various tasks in the estate, Dominic found himself alone with Naomi in the garden. It had been a beautiful evening, the air cool and crisp, with the stars barely visible through the thick clouds. Naomi was tending to a patch of roses, her movements graceful as she trimmed the plants with care. He watched her for a moment before approaching. Naomi didn't hear him at first, lost in the task at hand. It wasn't until she felt his presence that she looked up, surprised to see him standing so close. "Dominic," she said, her voice soft, almost startled. He smiled faintly, the coolness of his demeanor still present, but there was a hint of something else in his gaze. "I didn't mean to startle you," he said, his voice low. "I just wanted to see how you were doing." Naomi blinked, unsure of how to respond. "I'm fine, sir," she said, her hands still clutching the pruning shears. "I've been keeping busy." Dominic nodded, his eyes narrowing slightly as he studied her. "You've been doing more than just keeping busy. I've seen the way you handle things, how you handle yourself." Naomi felt a small knot form in her stomach, unsure of what he meant. "I'm just doing my job," she replied quickly. "That's not all you're doing, Naomi." His voice softened, and for the first time, Naomi noticed a hint of vulnerability in his words. "You're changing the way I see things. You've made me rethink everything." Naomi's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure if she had heard him correctly. What did he mean by that? What was he really trying to say? She opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught in her throat. Dominic's gaze held her in place, and for a moment, there was nothing but the sound of the wind rustling through the leaves and the distant hum of the estate. Finally, Dominic broke the silence. "I don't know what this is, Naomi, but I do know this. There's something about you that's different, and I think you're capable of more than you realize." Naomi stood there, unsure of what to say. She felt as though she were standing on the edge of something big and unknown. And as much as she wanted to step back, to retreat to the safety of her old life, she couldn't. She was already too deep. Dominic's words lingered in her mind long after the conversation ended, and as the days passed, Naomi found herself growing more and more uncertain of where she stood in his world. She had always been careful, always kept her distance from the powerful men and women around her. But Dominic was different, and that difference made her feel something she wasn't sure she could control. Naomi had always thought of herself as a quiet observer, someone who blended into the background. But recently, she had begun to feel like she was standing on the edge of something impossible to ignore. The mansion had always been a vast and intimidating place, but now, with Dominic's eyes on her, it felt even more so. She had never been one to seek attention, but his presence was always there, always looming. There was an intensity about him, an energy that made everything around him seem to shift. She couldn't help but feel like everything was changing, and she wasn't sure she was ready for it. It was late one evening, after a particularly long day of working around the estate, that Naomi found herself alone in the garden once again. The stars were barely visible behind the thick clouds, and the cool evening air felt like a welcome relief from the oppressive heat of the house. She was trimming some flowers, lost in thought, when she heard footsteps approaching. She turned to see Dominic standing at the entrance of the garden, his eyes fixed on her with that same piercing gaze. Naomi's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected to see him here, especially not after the strange conversation they had shared in the garden days ago. "Naomi." Dominic's voice was low, calm, almost soothing. She quickly stood up, wiping her hands on her apron. "Sir," she said, trying to sound composed. "I didn't mean to intrude. I was just—" She stopped herself, unsure of how to finish the sentence. Dominic's eyes softened for a moment, and he took a few steps forward, his presence filling the space between them. "You're not intruding," he said, his voice steady. "I wanted to speak with you again." Naomi's pulse quickened. She didn't know what to expect from him now, especially after the way he had spoken to her before. "I'm listening, sir," she said, her voice quiet. Dominic paused, studying her as if weighing his next words carefully. "You've been doing well," he said finally. "Better than I expected." Naomi wasn't sure if he was complimenting her or simply stating a fact. Either way, it made her feel uncomfortable. "Thank you," she murmured. "But that's not what I wanted to discuss." Naomi looked up at him, her brow furrowing slightly in confusion. "What do you mean?" "I've been thinking about what you said the other day," Dominic continued, his tone more serious now. "You said you were just doing your job, but I don't think that's all you're doing." Naomi felt a pang of uncertainty in her chest. Was he implying something else? She wasn't sure, but she could feel the weight of his words pressing down on her. "I'm just trying to help where I can," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I didn't ask for anything more." Dominic's gaze softened again, and for a moment, Naomi thought she saw a hint of something else in his eyes, something that wasn't as hard, as distant as it usually was. "I know," he said quietly, "but I can't help but notice that you've become more than just someone who helps around the house. You've become someone I rely on." Naomi didn't know how to respond. She had always tried to remain invisible, to keep to herself. But now, in front of Dominic, she felt like everything was changing, like she was being pulled into a world she didn't understand. "I don't know what you mean," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic's expression grew more thoughtful, and for the first time, Naomi saw a flicker of vulnerability in him. "You're not just a maid, Naomi," he said softly. "You've shown me something I didn't expect. And that means something to me." Naomi felt a rush of emotion in her chest, but she couldn't find the words to express it. She had never been the kind of person to ask for attention, but Dominic's words were changing something inside her. "I don't want you to feel uncomfortable," Dominic added, as if reading her thoughts. "But I think it's important that you understand something. I see you differently now." Naomi stood there, staring at him, her heart racing. She wasn't sure if she was ready to hear what he had to say next, but a part of her couldn't help but feel curious. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. Dominic took a step closer, his voice gentle. "You don't have to say anything right now. But know this, you've earned my respect. And that's something I don't give lightly." Naomi felt a swell of something deep within her, a mixture of confusion, hope, and fear. What did this mean for her? What did this mean for her future here at the estate? She had no answers, but for the first time, she realized that things were no longer the same. And no matter how much she tried to deny it, a part of her was ready to embrace the change. Naomi had never expected her life to take such a drastic turn. The calm routine she had once known had been shattered, and now, every day felt like stepping into an unknown world. Dominic's words echoed in her mind, replaying over and over again. "You've earned my respect." She couldn't understand it fully, but there was no denying the weight of what he had said. For the first time, she felt like she mattered. She wasn't just a maid in the background anymore. She was someone who was being noticed, someone who was being seen. But as much as she tried to focus on her work, Naomi couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that was growing inside her. Dominic had always been a figure of power, someone who commanded the room with a single look. Yet there was something in his eyes when he spoke to her that made her wonder if there was more to him than just the intimidating Mafia boss everyone feared. The days that followed were a blur of new responsibilities. Naomi found herself in positions she never thought possible. She was now trusted with tasks that went beyond cleaning and cooking. She was managing the estate's delicate operations, handling things that required precision and care. It was overwhelming, but Naomi rose to the challenge. She had always been someone who worked hard, never asking for recognition, but now, she found herself being acknowledged for her efforts in ways she had never imagined. And yet, no matter how busy she became, her thoughts often wandered back to Dominic. What did he really mean when he said she had earned his respect? Was he just being kind, or was there something more? She had never been good at reading people, especially not someone as complex as him. But she couldn't ignore the moments when their paths crossed. The way he looked at her, the subtle shifts in his tone, the way he seemed to listen when she spoke. It all made her question everything she thought she knew. One evening, as Naomi finished her work for the day, she found herself once again alone in the garden. The cool breeze ruffled the leaves, and the scent of fresh flowers filled the air. It was a quiet moment, one that Naomi cherished. But the peace was interrupted when she heard footsteps approaching. She turned to see Dominic standing in the doorway, his presence as commanding as ever. Naomi's heart skipped a beat. "Dominic," she said, her voice soft. "I didn't expect to see you here." He smiled faintly, his eyes locking onto hers with that familiar intensity. "I've been thinking about something," he said, his voice low. "Something I should have said earlier." Naomi's stomach fluttered with a mix of anticipation and uncertainty. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic took a step closer, his gaze unwavering. "I've been watching you, Naomi," he said, his tone surprisingly gentle. "And I think you should know something." Naomi held her breath, her mind racing with possibilities. What could he be talking about? "You've proven yourself in ways I didn't expect," Dominic continued. "Not just with your work, but with how you carry yourself. How you handle everything that's thrown your way." Naomi felt a strange warmth spread through her chest. She had never expected to hear words like that from him. "I'm just doing my best," she replied, her voice shaky. "And that's exactly what makes you stand out," Dominic said softly. "You don't ask for anything. You just do what's needed. And I admire that." Naomi didn't know what to say. She wasn't used to compliments, especially from someone like Dominic. But his words made something shift inside her, something she couldn't ignore. I didn't think you noticed," she murmured, her voice barely audible. Dominic's expression softened, and he took another step toward her. "I notice more than you think, Naomi," he said quietly. "And I think it's time you realize that you're not just here to serve. You're here because I believe in what you can do." Naomi's breath caught in her throat. For the first time, she felt like she had a purpose here that went beyond the walls of this mansion. She wasn't just a servant. She was someone who could make a difference. And for some reason, that thought scared her more than anything. Dominic's gaze lingered on her for a moment, and then he stepped back, giving her space. "I'll let you get back to your work," he said. "But don't forget what I said." Naomi watched him walk away, her mind racing with the weight of his words. As the evening air grew colder, she stood there, still trying to process everything that had just happened. She had no idea where this new path would lead, but one thing was certain. Things were changing, and she wasn't sure she was ready for the journey ahead. Naomi's life had become a strange mix of uncertainty and exhilaration. Every day felt like a delicate balancing act, as she tried to navigate the increasingly complex web that was her new reality. Her responsibilities had grown significantly, but with each passing day, she found herself becoming more capable, more confident in her ability to handle the tasks assigned to her. The quiet, unassuming maid who had once been content to stay out of the spotlight was now someone who was slowly becoming indispensable. Despite this, there was one thing that she still couldn't quite figure out: Dominic. His words, his actions, the way he looked at her. Everything about him made Naomi question her place in this world. She had never been one to dwell on her feelings, but there was something about Dominic that made her heart race, something she couldn't ignore. It wasn't just his power or the way he commanded attention. There was something deeper, something more personal that she couldn't quite explain. One evening, as Naomi was organizing the library, she heard the familiar sound of footsteps approaching. She turned to find Dominic standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable as usual. He didn't speak right away, but Naomi felt a sense of nervous anticipation settle in her chest. "Naomi," he said after a moment, his voice calm, but with an undertone that made her heart skip a beat. "I need your help with something." Naomi nodded, unsure of what he meant, but not questioning his request. "Of course, sir," she said, her voice steady. Dominic stepped further into the room, his gaze fixed on her. "I've noticed that you've been handling things around here exceptionally well," he said, his tone thoughtful. "You've proven yourself to be more than just a maid. You're someone I can rely on." Naomi couldn't help but feel a warm rush of pride at his words, but at the same time, there was a nagging feeling in the pit of her stomach. She wasn't used to being praised, especially not by someone like Dominic. "Thank you, sir," she replied, her voice soft, unsure of how to respond to the compliment. Dominic seemed to notice her hesitation and gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "You don't need to be so formal, Naomi. You've earned more than that." Naomi felt a flutter of confusion. What did he mean by that? "What do you need me to do?" she asked, pushing her doubts aside. Dominic paused, his gaze narrowing slightly, as if considering something. I need you to accompany me tomorrow, he said, his voice firm. I'm making some important decisions, and I want you to be there. Naomi blinked, taken aback by his request. Accompany you, she repeated. To where? To a meeting, Dominic said, his voice leaving no room for argument. It's important, and I trust you to handle it. Naomi stood there, unsure of what to say. A meeting? With him? She wasn't sure what kind of meeting he was referring to, but she knew one thing for sure. This was not the kind of request she was used to. She had always been in the background, observing, doing the work that no one else wanted to do. But now, Dominic was asking her to step into the foreground, to be part of something much bigger. She felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. I'll do my best, sir, she said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. Dominic nodded, his expression softening ever so slightly. I know you will, he said. He turned to leave the room, but paused at the door, glancing back at her. Naomi, he said, his voice quieter now, almost gentle. Don't underestimate yourself. You're more capable than you think. Naomi stood there, frozen for a moment, as the weight of his words sank in. She wasn't sure if she should feel reassured or even more uncertain than before. But one thing was clear. Her life was changing, and it was happening faster than she could keep up with. As the days passed, Naomi prepared for the meeting with Dominic, her thoughts racing. What could he possibly want her there for? Was it because he needed someone to help with the details? Or was there something more? She couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was about to happen, something that would change the course of her life forever. The night before the meeting, Naomi found herself lying awake, her mind whirling with possibilities. She had never felt so uncertain, so exposed. But at the same time, there was a part of her that couldn't help but feel a strange sense of anticipation. Whatever the future held, she knew one thing for sure. It was no longer going to be the quiet, predictable life she had once known. Naomi had spent the entire night preparing, her mind racing with questions and uncertainties. The day ahead felt like an invisible weight pressing down on her. She had always been used to moving through the estate unnoticed, performing her duties without ever questioning her place. But now, with Dominic's unexpected request, her life felt like it was shifting beneath her feet. What would this meeting entail? Why did he want her there? As she prepared herself for whatever lay ahead, Naomi couldn't help but feel the magnitude of the change. The life she had known seemed so far away now. She had moved from the background to the center of something much bigger, and every step felt like walking on a tightrope. She was about to accompany Dominic into a world she knew little about, and she had no idea how her presence would be received. Her thoughts were interrupted when she heard the sound of footsteps outside her door. She quickly stood up, smoothing her dress and taking a deep breath. When she opened the door, she was met by one of the staff members, who nodded at her politely. Mr. Romano is expecting you in the main hall, the staff member said, and Naomi simply nodded in return. Her heart pounded in her chest as she followed the staff member down the corridor. The mansion felt even more imposing now, the high ceilings, marble floors, and ornate chandeliers making everything feel larger than life. She had never fully appreciated the grandeur of it all until now, as she walked through it with a sense of purpose, carrying with her the weight of her new role. As she entered the main hall, she saw Dominic standing by the grand staircase, his back turned to her. For a moment, he seemed lost in thought, his dark suit sharp against the opulence of the room. He turned as soon as he heard her approach, and for a brief second, their eyes locked. Naomi could feel the intensity of his gaze, as if he was measuring her, assessing her, but there was something different this time, something softer, more vulnerable. Naomi, he said, his voice steady but with a hint of warmth. I'm glad you're here. His words, though simple, made her heart skip a beat. It was strange to hear him speak to her like this, as if she were truly a part of something important. Of course, sir, Naomi replied, her voice betraying a slight tremor. She wasn't sure what he expected from her, but she knew that this moment would define something new in her life. Dominic gestured for her to follow him, leading her down the grand hallway toward a large, imposing door. This meeting is about something crucial, he said as they walked. There are some decisions being made that will impact the future of the estate, and I need you to be there to witness it. Naomi nodded, though she still felt the uncertainty bubbling inside her. What could she possibly contribute to a meeting like this? She wasn't a part of his world, not in the way the other members of his inner circle were. They reached the door, and Dominic opened it, motioning for Naomi to step inside. The room was filled with a small group of well-dressed individuals, all gathered around a large table. They turned to look at her as she entered, but Dominic simply gave a brief nod, and they returned to their discussions. Naomi stood by the door, unsure of where to go or what to do. She was the only one who didn't belong here, the only one who didn't understand the significance of the conversation taking place. But as the minutes passed, she realized that Dominic had brought her here for a reason. He trusted her. That realization struck her like a wave. She wasn't just there to watch. She was part of something. The meeting continued, and Naomi found herself quietly observing, her thoughts racing. Dominic's presence filled the room, commanding respect from everyone around him. But there was something else in his demeanor, something that spoke to Naomi more than anything he had said. He was different when she was around, and for reasons she couldn't explain, she felt the pull of something unspoken between them. The meeting eventually ended, and as the others filtered out of the room, Dominic turned to Naomi. "You did well today," he said, his voice low but with genuine appreciation. "You handled yourself with grace." Naomi felt a rush of warmth at his words. It was the first time she had truly felt seen by him, not just as someone in the background, but as someone capable of contributing to the world he controlled. "Thank you, sir," she said, her voice steady despite the fluttering in her chest. Dominic looked at her for a long moment, as if considering something. "I'm glad I brought you here today," he said softly. "You've proven you're more than just a maid, Naomi." Naomi didn't know what to say to that. She felt a mixture of pride and confusion, as if she were standing on the edge of something vast and unknown. As Dominic walked away, leaving her alone in the grand room, Naomi couldn't help but feel that something had shifted within her. The future was uncertain, but she knew one thing for sure. She was no longer invisible. She was a part of something much larger, and no matter what happened next, she was ready to face it. Naomi couldn't shake the feeling that everything was changing too quickly. The past few weeks had been a blur of new responsibilities, unexpected praise, and unfamiliar emotions. She had always been content to stay in the background, doing her job without drawing attention to herself. But now, everything felt different. She had been entrusted with more than just cleaning and serving. Dominic had placed his trust in her, and that made her question her place in the world. Was she truly capable of stepping into a role she had never imagined for herself? Or was this all just a fleeting moment, one that would eventually fade back into the silence of her old life? She spent the following days lost in these thoughts, but she couldn't avoid the inevitable. She was now a part of Dominic's world, whether she liked it or not. The weight of his expectations, his quiet admiration, settled on her shoulders every time he looked at her. She had never imagined a man like him could look at her as anything other than a servant, but his actions spoke otherwise. She tried not to let it affect her, but it was hard to ignore the subtle shifts in their dynamic. One evening, after a long day of work, Naomi found herself in the library, sorting through papers. The grand room was quiet, the only sound being the rustle of pages as she worked. She had always loved the library. It was the one place in the mansion where she could escape, if only for a moment, from the weight of the world. But tonight, she couldn't seem to focus. Her mind kept drifting back to the meeting with Dominic. What had he meant when he said she was more than just a maid? What did it mean to him that she was now trusted to be part of his world? She didn't have answers, but the uncertainty gnawed at her. As she placed a stack of papers on the desk, she heard the sound of footsteps approaching. She turned to see Dominic entering the room. His dark eyes met hers, and for a moment, the world seemed to stand still. "Naomi," he said, his voice calm, but with an edge she hadn't heard before. "I need to talk to you." Naomi nodded, her heart skipping a beat. "Of course, sir," she said, her voice steady despite the sudden rush of nervousness that washed over her. Dominic stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "You've been doing exceptional work," he began. "But I need to know if you're truly ready for what's coming next." Naomi's heart raced. What did he mean by that? "I don't understand, sir," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic's expression softened for a moment, and he took a step closer, lowering his voice. There are decisions being made that will affect everything. And I need someone I can trust, someone like you, by my side. Naomi stood there, frozen for a moment, as the weight of his words settled in. She had always tried to stay in the background, but now Dominic was asking her to step forward, to become a part of something much bigger. Are you ready? Dominic asked, his voice almost gentle. Naomi didn't know what to say. She had never been one to back down from a challenge, but this was different. This was about more than just doing her job. This was about trusting herself, trusting Dominic, and trusting the world he was offering her. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. I am, she said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside her. Dominic's lips curved into a faint smile, and for the first time, Naomi saw something in his eyes, something softer, something that wasn't just the cold indifference of the Mafia boss everyone feared. Good, he said, his tone approving. I knew you were capable. Now, let's see where this goes. Naomi felt a rush of emotion in her chest, pride, fear, excitement, all mixed together. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she felt like she was standing on the edge of something that could change everything. As Dominic left the room, Naomi stood there for a moment, alone with her thoughts. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back. But as she thought about the path ahead, she realized something important. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was a part of something much larger, and no matter how uncertain the road ahead seemed, she was ready to walk it. Naomi's heart pounded as she stood in the grand hallway of the mansion, waiting for Dominic to lead her to the next phase of her unexpected journey. She had always considered herself a quiet observer, someone who lived in the shadows of those with power, yet now, she found herself standing beside the very man who commanded that power. Her thoughts swirled with the uncertainty of what lay ahead, but there was no turning back. Dominic had placed his trust in her, and in return, she had to prove herself worthy of it. She had no choice but to keep moving forward. The grand doors of the meeting room opened with a deep groan, and Naomi followed Dominic inside. The room was large and intimidating, filled with people Naomi didn't recognize. Their eyes flickered toward her for a moment before returning to their conversations. No one spoke to her, but their presence was enough to remind her that she was out of her depth. Dominic, however, moved with a quiet confidence, and as he approached the table, everyone fell silent. Naomi stood to the side, unsure of her role in this meeting, but Dominic's earlier words echoed in her mind. You're more than just a maid. She had to remind herself that she wasn't just there to observe. She had a purpose now. The meeting began, and Naomi found herself listening intently to the discussions taking place. The topics were foreign to her, filled with business terms and references to decisions that affected the future of the estate. It was hard to keep up, but she focused on the way Dominic handled himself. Calm, collected, yet every word he spoke carried weight. His presence filled the room, and Naomi couldn't help but admire the ease with which he commanded respect. It was clear that he was the one in control, but she also noticed the subtle way he kept glancing toward her, as if ensuring she was paying attention. For the first time, Naomi realized just how much she had come to rely on him, even if she didn't fully understand the world he inhabited. During a break in the meeting, Dominic motioned for Naomi to join him by the window. She hesitated for a moment, but then crossed the room, her footsteps quiet on the polished floor. As she reached him, he turned to face her, his gaze intense. I need you to understand something, Naomi, he said, his voice low enough for only her to hear. You're not just a part of this household now. You're becoming part of something much bigger. Naomi felt a shiver run down her spine. What did he mean by that? I don't know what you expect from me, sir, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic's lips curved into a faint smile, but it was fleeting. I expect you to learn, he said, to become more than just a maid. You're going to help shape the future of this estate. Naomi swallowed hard. I'm just here to help, sir. I never expected. She trailed off, unsure of how to finish her sentence. That's what makes you different, Dominic interrupted. You don't expect anything, and that's why I trust you. Naomi stood there, trying to process his words. The weight of his trust was overwhelming, but there was also something in his eyes that made her feel like she could do this. She had no idea where this path would lead, but for the first time, she felt like she was part of something important. The meeting continued, and Naomi tried to keep up, listening carefully and observing the interactions around her. But all she could think about was Dominic's words. He was giving her more than just tasks to complete. He was giving her a place in his world. By the end of the meeting, Naomi felt a strange sense of clarity. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was someone who had been trusted with responsibility. And though the road ahead was uncertain, Naomi was ready to face it, ready to prove herself worthy of the trust Dominic had placed in her. As they left the room, Dominic turned to her once more. "I'll be watching you, Naomi," he said, his voice soft but firm. "And I'm confident you'll prove me right." Naomi nodded, feeling a mixture of pride and fear. This was just the beginning, but for the first time, she felt like she had a chance to truly make a difference in the world that had always seemed so out of reach. And as she walked beside Dominic down the long hallway, she realized that everything had changed. She wasn't invisible anymore. She had a purpose now,